And we are back on the build phase. I'm Mr. Ben, and today I'm going to talk about Star Captain Marvel Star. To which you go, Mantle Captain Marvel? What? Who? This card exists? What? And those are all fair reactions to this announcement. I want to acknowledge at the top of the show, yes, there is still weirdness and uncertainty surrounding our game. That hasn't changed since the last couple episodes that I've made, kind of touching on that topic. But I don't want to dwell on it, and I don't really have anything new to say about all of these recent distribution marketing issues with our game. So I'm just going to set that stuff aside. And today, I just want to talk about a card. And that card is going to be Mantle Captain Marvel. But before I get into that, I do want to say thank you to the patrons of the show, the people who keep the lights on, pay the server fees around here. I really appreciate it. And if you like what we're doing here and want to join the coolest clubhouse in Versus, patreon.com/thebuildphase. Okay, so Mantle Captain Marvel. Why do I want to talk about this weird card from 2019 that nobody's ever played? Well, first of all, when this card was revealed, it got a pretty rough response on Facebook. I guess let's read the card over and then we're going to dive real deep on this guy. So he is a 6-cost 5/5/2 with flight and range. Alien Physiology. He can't have -1 counters, thank goodness, because his stats are not great at 6. And Cosmic Awareness. During each of your turns, but not during combat, you may ask an enemy player a yes or no question about their hand. They must answer truthfully. So when this initially got revealed, someone on the Facebook made a comment like, whatever intern made this card should be fired or should be taken off of game design and instead only allowed to fetch coffee. And Ben from Super Awesome Games was like, well, I'm not an intern, and I would definitely get Danny coffee if he asked me nicely. Sorry you don't like the card, which I think is a very diplomatic response to someone being quite mean. Now, my initial response to this card was pretty positive. I haven't gone back and listened to the show, but I remember thinking Cosmic Awareness is an amazing keyword. It's such a cool keyword. Now, you can't ask a yes or no question during combat, but that's almost irrelevant because you can do it before combat. The question could be, if I attack with this character into this character, do you have any plot twists in your hand that will change the combat math? Now, that is a yes or no question. I guess we should take a second to talk about honesty. It does say that they're required to answer truthfully, and admittedly, in a casual game, you really have no way of enforcing that. But if we're talking about casual play, surely you're not choosing to play games casually with people who cheat. Like, these are your friends. These are the people you are choosing to play the game with. I would like to think that in that situation, dishonesty would not be a concern. At the tournament table, when there are actual stakes, when there's actual cash and glory at hand that people don't always. I would like to think most people in most situations are going to do the ethical and honest thing most of the time. That is definitely not always the case, and one reliable way to push people off of their ethical intuitions is to inject cash, glory, or other incentives into whatever the task is. So yes, in a competitive environment, the caveat that they must answer your question truthfully does seem like something that could create a little bit of squish, because anytime you're required to be honest, but your opponent has no mechanism with which to check your honesty, oh, I forgot that I had this in my hand. Sorry, I didn't mean to answer those. So this does create some really weird situations for judges. And really, that's the remedy. This is not complicated in the sense that the solution to the problem itself could be complicated. Like, how do you compel honesty? Like the a problem that has befuddled philosophy for thousands of years. That's not what we're trying to solve here. What we're trying to do is set up a mechanism where honesty is not optional. And that is to say, hey, judge, can you just look at their hand, verify that my questions are being answered truthfully? Maybe you don't do that the first time you play this guy. Maybe that's something you do after something you have a reason to doubt. Or if it's, Top Cut, generally a judge is sitting there watching a lot of the Top Cut games pretty closely. So let's just set aside the idea that people would cheat, that people would be dishonest. Because in casual games, yes, there's no mechanism to check it, but once you know that the person you're playing a casual game with is cheating, if they're lying to you when in reaction to this card, why would you even want to keep playing with that person? And in competitive games, we have judges. So let's throw all of that out. I don't want to waste any more time talking about the concept of somebody cheating via dishonesty. So I guess the first thing I'm going to do is tackle why the card doesn't work, why it doesn't see play. And I think that really totally comes down to the fact that 6 cost 552 just isn't good enough. It wasn't good enough in 2019 when this card printed. Arguably, that wouldn't have been good enough if this came out in the base box of the game. 6 cost 5/5 is too expensive for a tech card. Even if this had great stats for a 6 drop, if this was a 6 drop 8/8, it still would not be good enough for 8/8 on 6, flight range, 2 health. That would get closer to it being playable, but it's still, the thing is, cards have to survive in order to be able to do their thing. And they have to be able to help you win the game in a tangible way. The best cards, the best supporting characters are characters that have good stats and good powers. And unfortunately, this guy has everything on this card is good other than that 5/5. That 5/5 really holds this guy back. And on turn 6, like if we're just looking at some other 6 drops that exist in the game, the stats start to, even if we just look at other 6 drops on this team, the stats start to look pretty weak. Iron Man at a 5/7, Cersei at a 12/3, Thor at a 6/5. So, and these all have much stronger, more directly related, like win the game powers, like Iron Man refreshing a superpower for you. Cersei 12 attack is kind of her whole deal. Thor and his Thunderbolt. So while Thor is a 6/5, and to be fair, the 6 cost 4 didn't see much play, but you pay a blue and give something 3/-1 counters, and now all of a sudden that 6/5 seems a lot more reasonable. Captain Marvel doesn't have any of that going for him. All of his value is kind of baked into this power. And while I think this power is really cool and really interesting and can put your opponent in some incredibly awkward situations, especially when they know that you have it, the issue is, in order to get value out of this guy, first of all, he doesn't come down until turn 6. Now, games, depending upon the format, sometimes go much longer, but in combat-based, like Civil War meta type games, those games are going to be ending on turn 7, 8, 9, much sooner. This guy gets much worse there. And in the games that go really long, you still want to be able to do something that affects the board with 6 resources. And that's really what holds this guy back. The Cosmic Awareness power, while it's fantastic, and while certain metas definitely would give you many turns of use out of it, you've got to be set up in such a way where you can protect this guy and keep him alive and not get him nullified and not, there's so many bad things that can happen to this dude. If this was a 3 cost, like 2/2, this card would be bananas, because there's just so many ways that you can ask questions to make them yes or no. If what you want to know is, does the Pixie Max player have enough yellows in their hand that they can go off? You can ask that question. Hey, do you have 3 ways to create yellow, to pay for yellow superpowers in your hand? Like, there's just so many ways that you can really attack the hand knowledge. The problem is that's only step 1 in the process. Once you know they don't have their combo, well, what else are you going to do with the rest of your turn? And unfortunately, spending your entire turn 6 to get this guy into play probably means you get to ask a question on turn 6, and then you get to ask a question on turn 7, and then he's just dead. Because 5/5 at that deep in the game, even with the alien physiology. Now, if he had the alien physiology again and was a 3 cost 1/1, so they can't pick him off with a -1 counter, that would still be playable. Not excellent, but it would be more reasonable because you can get him down. The biggest problem is, what I want to be able to do is play this guy on the turn when I want Cosmic Awareness, and then be able to use that to inform how I do the rest of my turn. Spending my whole turn to get this guy into play, to ask one question to inform my turn 7, it's just too slow. It's too slow, and the stats are too punchable. I'm sure they gave him low stats because they realized how dangerous this power could be, especially in the hands of a skilled player who knows the meta very well. And generally, in competitive environments, you're going to know your opponent's deck pretty well too. So the potential upside of Captain Marvel being able to stick around and ask 3 or 4 questions starts to really create a information and knowledge imbalance in the game. Now, a lot of times when I get excited about these kinds of imbalances, I do have to qualify that not every player is going to care to, and not every player is going to be capable of taking advantage of these kinds of imbalances. And knowledge imbalance is only effective insofar as you can do something with the knowledge. A unit that comes down and just like kills an opponent's character. The recent Deadpool, he comes down, he strikes something as soon as he comes into play. Now, that's not giving you any additional knowledge about what your opponent is doing, but it is affecting the board directly. And those kind of direct actions tend, not always, but tend to be what we're looking for in Versus. Versus is a very immediate, most of the time, a very immediate and board-based game. That comes from, there's no summoning sickness. You get to play attack with units as soon as you play them, or the turn you play them. And because of that, the game moves at kind of a quicker pace, and finding the places where you can extract value from hand knowledge can be a little bit trickier in Versus than some other games. Again, because of the pace of the game. But that doesn't mean it's bad. There are still definitely games, the entire like tuck and pass meta. There are decks and there are formats where we can have characters that hunker down and hide. So I think a place where this guy probably could have shined if he was going to was the tuck and pass meta that we recently went through, like in an Invisible Woman, where you can keep him alive and you know the game is going to go long, long, long into the late game. Unfortunately, even in that setting, even in the draw your whole deck meta with Flash Thompson, taking a whole turn to get a tech card online that has kind of a questionable payoff, very skill dependent payoff. Like, not only do you have to have some skill in how you ask the questions, you also have to have some skill in how you apply that information. So there's lots of fail points. There's lots of places where this card just looks bad. Because if he was a blank 5/5/2 for 6, that's unplayable. So if you can't get value out of his Cosmic Awareness, you can't get value out of this card, and it is a risk. Even the most skilled player with the best questions might not know what the best question is to ask in that specific moment. So this, maybe more than any other card in the game, is a extreme skill test, and at such a high cost. You use your entire turn 6 to maybe get a really weak 4-drop size body. That's rough. And I think that's why we haven't seen this guy get played much, even though I would argue Cosmic Awareness is one of the most interesting keyword powers that we have in the entire game. So, all right. I realize it's a little weird to grab a card from 5 years ago and kind of do a deep dive, but I've been thinking about this dude and like, why did he never show up in the tuck and pass meta? And my guess is the risk is just too great. The body isn't good enough. You have to have stuff in play before you even play him to kind of protect him, which like an Invisible Woman main character could and would do. But even then, we just haven't seen the environment where you could afford to take turn 6 off to set up a greatly improved turns 7, 8, 9, etc. So that's where we landed with Star, Captain Marvel Star. Unfortunately, the keyword is great, but the body carrying the keyword was just not quite good enough to let this guy see play at any kind of competitive level. I will say, asking dumb questions of my kids in my casual playgroup back when this guy first came out was a lot of fun. Okay, this has been the Build Phase. I'm Mr. Ben, and you should go win some games.